How can we learn to be an effective music announcer? You can't really learn to be an effective radio announcer from reading a single section of a textbook or even from reading a whole book. So reading this book, taking this course, reviewing the course will not turn you into an effective music announcer. You can't really learn to be an effective radio announcer from anything short of the things that we've talked about before. Keeping proper balance when mixing sounds, such as your voice and background music, having good equipment so that the operation goes smoothly and you transition from song to song or from talk segment to song, and you'll find the better approach is to be yourself and to develop a warm, friendly style. What does the radio program format look like? When you take into account subcategories or fragmented versions of some of the major formats, the actual number of radio formats balloons from there. Although we usually think of a radio station's music as its format, we know that there are also non-musical formats. The term format really means the arrangement of all the programming elements that a station presents. Music, commercials, jingles, news, and all the other elements that make up the station's format are placed around the clock to let the announcer know when during the hour each element should be played. The adult contemporary format is one of the most popular programming formats in radio today. It will be found in almost every radio market. A good portion of the AC audience listens at workplace locations. Adult contemporary artists on the charts include Ed Sheeran, Paramore, Maroon 5, Shawn Mendes, Adele, and they're presented in longer music sweeps broken up by 3 or 4 spot set breaks each hour. The overall tempo of adult contemporary formats is most often a medium pace, and the announcer's style should match this. Their announcing style should convey a sense of chatting with the listeners and providing them with necessary information rather than announcing. Contemporary or hit radio is a descendant of the top 40 format, which was popular in rock and roll up to the 1980s. Whether singles or album cuts, the music is presented in a rotation that has the top pop, rock, R&B songs repeating as frequently as every 90 minutes. While some contemporary hit radio, or the acronym CHR, announcers develop a true celebrity personality, others may not do much more than read liner cards, short station slogans or image lines, or station promotional announcements, usually prepared by the program director. The announcer will also have to be knowledgeable about the music played, because most CHR listeners are true fans of these artists and will quickly spot someone who is just faking it on air. Can you imagine? That would be a disaster. Let's talk about country music. At one time, most country music stations were called country and western and had a twang sound to their music, and announcers and catered to a rural lifestyle, most prevalent in sections of the southern and western parts of the United States. So who were these artists? Luke Combs, Chris Stapleton, George Strait, Taylor Swift, etc. Country announcers usually have a bright, cheery style and have an active interest in the music they play. Although they don't need a good old country boy demeanor, country DJs are usually very down to earth and convey a neighborly feeling in their own air work. Smooth jazz. a blend of easygoing popular music and lighter jazz vocals helps define the smooth jazz format. It's a subgenre of adult contemporary, often called new adult contemporary. The primary audience is adults 35 to 55 and older, and they're artists like Najee, Dave Coase, Nora Jones, etc. Often, the announcing chores are relatively simple with short song introductions, basic time, temperature information given between long music sweeps. Rock. In our country, the young people are very much into rock, and that's about it. So rock stations can range from album rock to classic rock to contemporary rock, with stations often playing very similar music. The AOR developed from the 1960s around rock and 1970s progressive rock stations. Had an audience that was primarily for rock music, 12 to 34 years old, especially male listeners. The Rolling Stones, Aerosmith, Led Zeppelin, Ozzy Osbourne, The Who, Pink Floyd, Bob Dylan, etc. Many contemporary rock stations also have added newer artists such as Black Crowes, Velvet Revolver, Marilyn Manson, etc. And of course, this is a little dated, so the list would be more extensive now that we have other contemporary artists that have made the scene. Rock announcers will still display a relaxed conversational style. The rock DJ is often expected to understand the lifestyle of the listeners and be able to ad-lib about common experiences. Let's talk about news talk information. Although not a music format per se, this format is still programmed by a fairly large number of radio stations. And they fall under the following: news talk information, some are all news, some are all talk, many are a blend of both. Typically, these stations are news heavy during the drive time and more talk during the midday and evening time slots. The news, talk, and information announcer needs to be very well read and is expected to have an interest in current events. He or she will need to have strong interviewing skills and be able to ad-lib on a variety of topics, so you can't be out in left field when it comes to what's happening in the world. Urban Contemporary. UC is a format name that covers stations playing music dominated by Black artists and other programming elements of interest to the young urban community. Urban is city. Music styles like rap, hip-hop, rhythm and blues, soul, disco, contemporary pop are all part of the mix. Key urban artists include Weeknd, The Carters, Beyonce, Rihanna, Lil Jones, Jaheim, Snoop Dogg, etc. The UC DJ would need to be knowledgeable about the music, and most are expected to be fairly upbeat and festive in their delivery style. The oldies. Radio stations that program rock music from the 50s to the 60s are using an oldies format. A few stations concentrate on just one musical era, and another variation is the jammin' oldies format, which features rhythm and blues, Motown, oldies from the 60s and 70s. Rock and roll pioneers like Presley, the Beatles, Chuck Berry, the Beach Boys, the Four Seasons, the British Invasion, Motown artists get prominent airplay on oldies format stations. The oldies DJ also needs to develop a good rapport with listeners, as most oldies stations make heavy use of requests, dedications, contests, and listener call-ins. Alternative. Do we know what alternative is? It's not an alternative idea, but rather alternative as a mode of music. So it could be new rock, modern rock, progressive. It came to the forefront during the 80s and 90s, so that's still a little dated. Most of the music on modern rock stations is less than a year old and comes from the influence of punk, grunge, hip hop, metal. So, who are these artists? Beck, The Killers, Vampire Weekend, Blink 182, Red Hot Chili Peppers. This format appeals primarily to 18 to 34-year-old listeners. However, that group is divided into two distinct generations. Generation X, 25 to 34, and Generation Y, 18 to 24. However, an increasing number of alternative artists have found acceptance by a wider audience. Many alternative stations and announcers have sounded more and more like traditional rock formats. Classical music. I love classical music. It lets you do things, it relaxes you. At the same time, it makes your work seem lighter, right? There are less than 250 radio stations programming classical music, and most of these are public, non-commercial stations. Let's take a look as to why. Despite the small number of radio stations that program classical music, they do maintain an intensely loyal audience that is heavily composed of listeners with higher than average income and educational levels. Some classical stations have been very successful because certain advertisers want to reach this audience. In most circumstances, the music is the primary attraction for the listeners to these stations. Obviously, not everyone who would make a good radio announcer would make a good classical music announcer, but if you have the skills and the interest, it might just be your cup of tea. Okay, announcing according to day part. So the radio broadcast day is broken into 5 key day parts: morning, midday, afternoon, evening, and all night. So the morning drive is from 6 to 10, most listened to. Typically people tune in for music, news information, be entertained, get any kind of updates with the traffic. Midday time slot is from 10 to 3, and the emphasis switches from announcing to playing more music. The majority of the audience at this time is at home, and it's usually females. And then from 3 to 7, you up the tempo, and the announcer style should reflect this. Weather is important, traffic is important, in-auto listeners, so you need to keep in mind that that's supplemented by teens getting home from school. The evening announcer works a 7 to midnight air shift, during which a big part of the news audience moves to television, especially adult listeners. From midnight until 6 a.m. is the domain of the all-night or overnight DJ. This is a fairly dead time for radio, so there are a few commercials and other non-musical elements are programmed. How about satellite radio? Music channels run the full spectrum of musical styles, from pop and rock to country, jazz, and classical, and everything in between. Many channels are commercial free, and some run a limited amount of commercial content to help keep subscription prices low. An announcing position with a satellite radio service, cyber jockey would require the usual skills of a broadcast announcer, which means being knowledgeable, knowing how to interview, practice, etc., being prepared. Satellite radio firms advertise job positions in the industry, trade publications, and also use their websites to promote career opportunities with the companies. While there may seem to be fewer announcing jobs in traditional radio these days, there are also new opportunities arising all the time, and the astute radio announcer will not overlook the possibility of being an announcer for satellite radio. How about podcasts? With proper software and equipment, you can begin a career in music announcing via podcast. So this requires the same skills, traditional delivery methods. Most successful podcasts are less than an hour. It's related to the file size. The longer the podcast, the longer the download. The listeners prefer short download times. An important aspect to consider is music licensing. Podcasts are an important aspect of how the audience listens to music. I'll see you in a moment. Thank you for your attention. Now let's take a look at the music video jockey. The music video jockey, like most DJs, are passionate about music. They have good ad-lib skills, a good delivery style, appear natural, and they are able to perform their job smoothly, as in every other job that deals with media performance. Music video channels like MTV have held open trials to find their next star. Today, MTV places less importance on music and more on reality and pop culture program aimed at the youth market. Still, MTV and other music channels offer the possibility of announcing opportunities. The Internet DJ. There are several heavy metal stations that serve an audience that is often ignored by traditional radio, but other station program, CHR, alternative, or other typical radio formats. It should be noted that the majority of announcers on these amateur stations have no training as broadcast announcers, and the quality of the programming can range from mediocre to quite professional. However, if the number of stations continues to grow and the public comes to see the internet as a form of radio, the opportunities for the professional music announcer on commercial internet stations will increase, and of course, with time, that's what we have exactly seen. To conclude, in media and broadcasting, ad-lib announcing is never as spontaneous as you might imagine. What looks like really easy, the great ones make it look easy, but it's actually a very hard skill set. The key to ad-libbing is knowing the subject you're talking about and being able to edit your comments. Most radio announcers are employed at a music format radio station, and their announcing style should match the format and day part in which they are working. Let's take a look at Chapter 10, Sports Announcing. One area of performance that holds much attraction for many young people is sportscasting. Sports programming remains popular with broadcast, cable, internet because of the large audience it attracts, and more channels are becoming increasingly available. This means that the prepared, capable person that's willing to work hard is likely to find good opportunities. The sports announcing field has many segments, from sports reporter to sports anchors, play-by-play, color to sports talk host, with additional variations along the way. And what we have seen in our country is individual athletes who have become really great in their field, later on become announcers, or they do the play-to-play and participate in sports talks. The field of sports seems to offer glamour and excitement, and sportscasters would like to some would like to claim to dislike their occupation. Why? They have to work really long hours, travel a lot, and you keep going to places you've been to so many times before. So the field is also very competitive. There are many applicants. Former athletes and coaches who already have connections in the media have an inside track into then fulfilling these positions, as we mentioned earlier. So when you consider the opportunity in sportscasting, it is encouraging to realize that the growth of cable TV and internet has resulted in a much wider coverage of sporting events. As competition between broadcasters and cablecasters grows, cable's drive to make virtually any game available to a pay-per-view audience means that coverage and opportunity should grow in the future. Reporting of sports. Sports reporting provides the greatest number of opportunities in broadcasting as a whole, as most television stations employ one or more reporters who gather sports news and deliver it on the air. The frequency and length of these will vary considerably with the station format and policy. What are their duties? There are many. The demands are heavy. The job can be satisfying as well, though. In terms of general requirements, what are they? Perhaps the first is to realize that many of your audience members may be nearly expert on the sport in question and will not tolerate mistakes or ignorance. They're usually really passionate. In both radio and television, your station will either be part of a network or may subscribe to one or more sports services that will provide you with audio and video feeds. And in every case, accuracy, details, and color are essential. What a sports reporter covers. One of the key elements is the need to gather and keep current on a significant variety of stats. Many sports fans follow stats closely. Fans will expect information on game conditions, injuries, slumps, league standings, and even the statistical fact. Using all the reporter's tools, such as recognizing a story opportunity, pursuing it, locating sources, checking facts, writing it in an interesting and informative manner, is imperative. Part of your duties includes recording actualities and sound bites to go with your report. Keep a program with you while you are working and check for any changes in numbers, and never rely solely on the public address announcer for information. They too can get it wrong sometimes. To give you an example from my own family, my husband, my son, and one of my daughters and her husband are such avid fans in different sports that they know the names of the players, the coaches, players from years back, up and coming players, the stats on everybody. And so they expect and in a way demand that the person covering is going to know as much, at least as much, and usually expect for them to know even more because this is their job. What about the sport anchor? Some larger organizations may have a sports director and he doubles as the sports anchor or the main on-air talent, and they deliver stories that are fed in by reporters. He's faced with dealing with all the challenges of reporting, plus the pressure of assembling the report, combining feeds and reports from national sources as well as the local ones. One of the problems faced by both reporters and anchors is how to keep the delivery of scores interesting. I don't usually care for it and I mute the TV if I'm watching sports because they're screaming. You already know the outcome. Let's say in a basketball game, it's very obvious that one side or the other oftentimes is going to win, but they keep acting like, oh, it's still a competition. No. And so they just keep upping the ante and talking as if though this was the most exciting thing in the world. And at times it just isn't. Okay? So as with the sports reporter, the sports anchor needs energy, enthusiasm, knowledge in significant amounts. When starting out, being too clever or crazy can be a distraction. Save the wild material for the time in your career when you are well established. play-by-play sideline reporting and analysis. The idea of traveling with teams and getting to associate with the players seems exciting. You may be employed by a station, a network, the team, cable company. The time required to prepare for sportscasts can vary extensively. However, if you're a beginner, you will not be with just one organization. You probably will have 2 or 3 teams who contract you for your services. So the duties of the PBP announcer are preparation and calling the action. Most PBP and color announcers build up a rapport after many games together and develop an easy and natural style of working in tandem, meaning they work alongside each other. Now, if we're looking at sports reporting in this day and age, you have just as much women as men. So it used to be a minority. When this was published, it says more women are enjoying success, but now you have as many women as you have men. Nevertheless, a woman who wants to break in has to be thoroughly prepared, multi-skilled, and determined. This does not apply so much to now because with the diversity, and inclusion and equity, each station has to have a certain number of men, a certain number of women, a certain number of white, black, Asian, and Hispanics. She must be prepared for the fact that the audience, it used to be dominated by men, but not more, and many of them are slow to accept a woman as credible. I have not spoken to people to find out how people feel about it. I know that for me, it still feels a little awkward because it hasn't been that long since you keep seeing women announcing sports or getting in with the guys, like if it's second nature to them, and it is. And to be fair, they're just as good as the men, but it just feels like they're just breaking the ice now. Road trips. One aspect prospective and beginning sports announcers may not consider is what to plan for when you're on the road. So when you're on the road, it's like if you're packing to go on a trip. For instance, tomorrow I'm going on a trip and I'm going to Salt Lake City, Utah for an AP reading. I'm doing this, I have to pack, and I had been sick because I just recently got back from Asia and I've been dealing with an Asian variety of COVID. So now I'm much better, and as you can tell, I haven't been coughing or sneezing too much. Nevertheless, I need to be prepared when I get all my bags done because I have to make sure I have all my toiletries, the right number of clothing and the right kind of clothing, the right kind of shoes. I have to look at the weather, etc. So when you're on a road trip and you're an announcer, you have to make sure that you know where everything is stored. When you arrive at the scene, you have to know how to set up, where to set up. Your dress and behavior are a big factor in determining how many times you get to go on the road. So you have to be really sharp. It only takes 1 or 2 bad reports to the station and you'll be on the bench. That's it for you. So let's talk about a sports talk host. Sports talk is primarily a radio program format. Some cable companies have been televising these programs as well though. So knowledge is probably the biggest factor for the successful sports talk host. You have to know every little iota of information about the players and the teams. Assuming you're taking call-ins, your next caller may bring up almost any subject and you'll be expected to be able to respond to it. To be successful, you must be an expert on what's going on in sports, and in addition, you might consider doing remotes in sports bars and other locations where you can get to meet your audience, promote your show, and learn about what people want to discuss the most. Let's look at some overview and conclusions on this topic. Sports reporting in its many forms can make for an exciting and fulfilling career in announcing. It's one that appeals to a lot of people. Why? Because The competition is not only fierce, but the topic itself, which is sports, is so big and so huge, particularly in the United States, that a lot of people would want to pick this up if they want to go into some type of reporting. In order to be successful or to get into that realm, you have to gain experience. So take every opportunity that comes your way, even if you think, that's not really what I want to do. This seems so inconsequential. This is not what I had in mind, but you have to start somewhere. And generally you start at the bottom unless you have a good connection. In our country, they say it's not what you know, but who you know. I can tell you that if you know everybody, but you get up there and you don't know what you're doing, your days are numbered. It's not gonna work. So veteran pros record and review everything that they do. And this is something that you can do to improve and grow your networks at every opportunity. Thank you for your time and attention. Let's take a look now together at Chapter 11, Specialty Announcing. What is specialty announcing? Okay. So while performance areas that include the newscaster, the radio and commercial announcer, and the interviewer make up the bulk of the opportunities for on-air talent, several other fields of performance announcing deserve some attention. Weather, traffic, financial, feature, multimedia narration, on-air sales announcing, movie trailers, and video games. To be successful in any specialty area requires an ability to master some basic skills and techniques, as well as a passion for being successful in that specific area of announcing. Let's take a look at weather reporting. Weather reporting has evolved considerably since the early days of radio and television. Although weather is still broadcast as short segments in radio, it receives more attention and is broadcast more frequently on many television stations. So, just so you know, the Anglo culture, the typical North American person, is always looking for the weather. And they start a lot of their conversations about nice weather we're having today, or oh, the weather outside is so nice today. Oh, wow, it's going to be a really hot day. Or, oh, it looks like there's rain in the forecast. Cubans and Hispanics as a whole, and there are many in South Florida, can tell you that they never start a conversation talking about weather. They could care less about the weather. If it starts raining, they go, oh, it's raining. Possibly, but if not, they'll just say, hey, we're gonna get wet, it's raining. That's the end of it. So it's not a topic for Hispanics. However, this is an Anglo country, although it has a huge population of Hispanics. Nevertheless, I thought it would be a nice sidebar for me to share that with you. In addition, the nation has become more conscious of the potential for sudden, serious storms and the value of broadcasts about them. Stations expend considerable resources in keeping their audiences current on the weather. Weather reporting comes with various terms, many of which are not familiar to a person, and in many cases will include animations as part of the graphic. The chroma key system for weather. One of the more challenging experiences for the beginning TV weather person is working with the chroma key system mentioned earlier in this text. Many people realize the weather maps behind a reporter are not really there, and that the reporters work by looking or pointing here so that you have an image that's superimposed on the maps. Chroma key screens were originally always blue, but it was discovered that on tighter shots, the chroma key scene could sometimes be visible in the eyes of a blue-eyed reporter. As chroma key was used in news reporting for many years, There were situations where war footage could be seen in the reporter's eyes. Do you believe that? Green chroma key was developed to overcome this. This was really interesting and very techy and very scientific. Let's look at what's happening with weather now. Can you think of a more compelling topic right now than going green, climate change, the changes in weather pattern? Some people predict that Florida will be underwater in a matter of a few years. Others believe that there will be some areas of the world that will be uninhabitable. Currently in India, there have been students who have not been able to go to school because of how hot it is outside. People in Mexico were experiencing such hot weather that there were 10 deaths associated with the hot weather. Myself and my husband, when we left China was fine weather-wise, and many days we had very cold weather. When we arrived in Vietnam, it was so hot. Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand felt like you were literally in a furnace. I did not realize, so this was ignorance on my part, that traveling to Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand should really happen during the months of October, November, December. Aside from that, if you go, you have to be prepared to be miserable. And I chose my word carefully, miserable. I am talking about perspiring, sweating so profusely that I would literally go into a bathroom that had a bidet hose, and I would go like this, having removed all my clothing, showering myself down even while the perspiration was still coming out, and then putting my clothes back on all wet. Do you believe that? It's the truth. When I was going up the temples in Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom, the heat was almost unbearable. You had to stop, take a breath. People had to be wearing hats. No one was out there without sunblock. Many people had to have an umbrella. You could only walk for a little bit, and then you had to look for a bathroom. You had to be drinking water and hydrating. It wasn't just, oh, it's hot, but rather it was unbearable and intolerable. I don't know how we did it. At one point, the heat made me pass out, and I stumbled and fell on the sidewalk, hurting myself. And even now, I touch this and it's sensitive, but I've had to go through a lot of pain and took a lot of muscle relaxers and painkillers. So, why am I going into this topic? Well, because right now, the weather is increasingly taking up more time in media. And if you look at different parts of the world, we've had more tsunamis, more earthquakes, more flooding, more tornadoes. In our country, we've had tornado after tornado, more devastating hurricanes. In other words, our weather is becoming more and more extreme. Therefore, it's going to get more coverage time. Weather reporting styles. What kind of personality is suited to report weather? You can have a range of personalities. However, there are 3 qualities common to all weathercasters. What is it? Seeming to be involved and be interested in what they're doing, showing energy without becoming too happy-go-lucky and looking like a caricature, and relating to your audience. Obviously, if you're forecasting that a hurricane is coming to Miami in South Florida and you live in the Florida Keys, trust me that you're living for the next update on the hurricane. And it happens every so many hours. So even for myself, I have a sister that lives in the Keys, and I'm always staying in touch with that. In most cases, as weathercaster, you can be reasonably informal in your greeting and your remarks. You're not so attached to your side monitor, so you're always aware that you have an audience in front of you. Radio weather reports are usually read either from the wire copy or a copy that was written for that particular occasion. And television reports will be largely ad-libbed, perhaps with the assistance of some cue cards. Weather reporting has progressed from being something of a sideshow to being a respected science. Again, we have to remember that as the years have gone by, this has increased to a larger extent exponentially. Also, for those who find it attractive and are willing to acquire the necessary knowledge and skills, weather forecasting and reporting can be a rewarding specialized career. Okay, traffic reporting. In large cities, the traffic continues to become more and more unbearable. I saw that in China, all over China, in fact. And we traveled a lot after we were in Wuxi. We went to Shanghai, we went to Beijing, we were in Nanjing, Suzhou. Some of this happened while we were in Wuxi on the weekends. And then we went to Luoyang, and then in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand, it was bumper to bumper, people pressing down on their horns, and kind of scary traffic, to be honest. So, traffic reports may provide an avenue into media performance that would otherwise be closed. It can be exciting, challenging, perplexing, all at the same time. One of the more interesting aspects is that you may be reporting for several stations, sometimes only seconds apart. The extreme situation you could encounter is that because fewer companies own more stations, this consolidation means that you may be called upon to do reports for more than one city, even one that's a distance away. Through it all, you need to keep your professional tone, use the appropriate style for the station that you are reporting. So if you're doing multiple, you have to keep that in mind as well. Financial reporting. For general reporting of financial news, a student needs to know about the elements that are most interesting to the public and how to interpret them. For full-time anchoring on a cable channel, knowledge of economics and experience in the stock market, as well as news writing and reporting skills, are essential. A good understanding of the world's political and economic structure will come into play. So you talk about the market, you hear tips and recommendations, and perhaps knowing people who have made a great deal of money in stocks. So you want to get your audience to want to dabble in the stock market, and maybe you want to do that yourself. Talking about the market every day, hearing tips, perhaps knowing people who have made a great deal of money is what a lot of people in your audience are going to be expecting, this last point. So, what does a financial reporter cover? What you include in a financial report will first be determined by the amount of time that you have. Listeners want to know the current figures, the amount of change since the last business day. You need to look for stories that have big implications, local connections. You don't want to show excitement over any stocks or companies. You deliver the report in a calm but energetic voice, because listeners will be upset enough if their stock has dropped without you adding to it. Feature specialists. So some stations have a person who's responsible for preparing what might be thought of as a novelty feature. So, the host of a specialty feature must have considerable rapport with the audience and be an interesting person. You only have a few moments to connect to your audience, so you need to establish your topic, get them hooked, and get them interested. So, a key point to remember is that he returns the item after use, as ethical issues would come into play. You don't want to jeopardize the credibility. Host selling. This is a newer performance specialty, and it's a shopping channel. You have people that are showing you products, advertising the products. They show you an image and you support yourself with as much research, facts, and trivia as possible. You may not always use them, but it will ensure that things go smoothly. Voiceover and narration. This is what we see with commercials, news reports, documentaries, public service announcements. You need a good voice, the ability to read the copy effectively, show up ready to work and on time. You have to promote yourself, respond to opportunities quickly, and the word quickly is very important. Learning to do voiceover work can begin when you're still in school and continue after graduation. So you will want to attend workshops and have a coach help you. Developing voiceover skills. How do you do this? You want to seek opportunities where you can coordinate your delivery to the visual portion of the program. So if you're doing a voiceover for existing visuals, the first step is to get familiar with the copy. Examine the visuals that you're going to be recording about. So some producers will give you extensive instructions, and others say, hey, this is your baby, you do it. So listen carefully to their comments and instructions so that you do what your boss wants you to do. And keep in mind, obviously, that you want to meet their needs. Voice characterization. So many people have made careers out of providing the voices for cartoon characters. Newer sources of assignments are video and computer games, and they have been added to make them more attractive. Newer sources of assignments are video and computer games, commercials that take advantage of a performer's ability, commercials that center on a Dracula-type voice, a Southern Belle, an Irish Brogue, etc. You need to practice these voices regularly so that you sound very natural in them. Program hosting. Some students dream of hosting their own show. First, if you're the host, you're going to have to be very visible. Everyone will be watching how you conduct yourself. At a local level, you may be well working without a teleprompter. When you're hosting, you might be doing a show, a segment. Regardless, there will be probably an audience and criticism. YouTube has numerous videos about all topics that are produced and hosted, and you can look at those. So in conclusion, most of the skills employed by broadcast performers will be called upon, but you also need to develop specialized skills and knowledge. These examples should not be seen as the only specialty announcing areas either, particularly now since some time has elapsed. Movie show host, consumer reporter, industrial media narrator, to name a few, are other broadcast performance opportunities to pursue. Thank you for your time and attention.